4:21 a.m., 12 miles north of Cheney, Washington, a line of dark SUVs killed their headlights 200 yards from the address. 14 FBI tactical agents moved in a low crouch through frozen scrub grass toward a beige model home, sitting alone in an unfinished tract development. No street lighting, no neighboring structures, just raw graded lots and skeletal frames of houses that had never been finished. The target was Lot 27. On paper, a vacant model home listed as unoccupied since November. In reality, something was keeping a signal alive inside those walls. And somewhere beneath the unfinished floor joists, a woman who had been missing for 27 days was still breathing. What led 14 agents to that specific address on that specific morning had nothing to do with a tip, an informant, or a surveillance breakthrough. It began with a Verizon field technician who almost didn't bother writing up a minor paperwork anomaly. A man who finished a routine audit drove home and thought nothing more of it. His name was Eric Chambers. What he flagged on the afternoon of April 15, 2026, would close a case that Spokane law enforcement had quietly stopped expecting to close. March 19, 2026, 7:14 p.m. Sacred Heart Medical Center, Spokane, Washington. Hannah Volker, 34 years old, a registered nurse in the hospital's intensive care unit, badged out after a 12-hour shift. She had worked the unit since 2019. Her colleagues described her as methodical and precise, the kind of nurse who stayed until the next shift was fully briefed before leaving. On March 19th, she stayed 40 minutes past handoff to finish documentation on 2 critical patients. She left through the main employee exit, crossed the parking structure to Lot D, and that was the last confirmed record of her location. The next morning, her silver sedan was still in Lot D, unchanged, locked. No sign of a struggle around the vehicle, no personal items left on the front seat that would suggest a hasty departure. Her phone had gone dark at 7:22 p.m. the previous evening, 8 minutes after she badged out, somewhere between the employee exit and Lot D. The last cell tower ping placed her within 400 feet of the hospital campus. After that, nothing. No ATM activity, no credit card transactions, no emergency contacts called, no ransom demand to her family, at least not initially. Her ex-husband, David Volker, was contacted by Spokane PD within 18 hours of the missing persons report. He reported no threats, no unusual contact, nothing that explained her disappearance. He cooperated fully. Spokane PD opened an active investigation. Missing adult female, no evidence of voluntary departure, last seen on a hospital security camera at 7:14 p.m. The case drew regional attention for the first 9 days. Then it hit what most missing persons cases hit. No new evidence. 3 weeks in, the working theory inside the department had splintered into competing possibilities. A voluntary disappearance, a crime of opportunity, a targeted abduction with an unknown motive. None of them had traction. None of them had evidence. On day 22, the department's active board had roughly 24 open cases. Volker's file was quietly moved to the long-term missing section. Not closed, not forgotten. Moved. The distinction matters to the investigators who work these cases. It means they believe something happened. They just don't know what. What nobody at Spokane PD knew yet was that on day 3 of Hannah Volker's disappearance, a single ransom demand had been sent to Sacred Heart Medical Center's administrative email. One message, no follow-up. The email originated from a burner account routed through 3 anonymizing proxies. It referenced Volker by name, described details of her ICU badge access that weren't public, and demanded a payment routed to a cryptocurrency wallet. The hospital's IT security team flagged it and notified the FBI field office in Seattle. The Bureau analyzed the message. The encryption trail went cold at the 3rd proxy. The cryptocurrency wallet had never been used before or since. There was nothing to pull. The kidnappers sent one demand, then silence. That silence was deliberate. The three men who had taken Hannah Volker were not improvising. They had spent time planning this, and the plan showed a specific kind of patience. Their names, as they would later appear in federal indictments, were Marcus Delray, 41, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, Thomas Hoff, 38, also Coeur d'Alene, and Raymond Cull, 44, Post Falls, Idaho. All three had worked together for years as property renovation contractors, buying distressed residential properties, flipping them, selling them. They knew construction. They knew unfinished buildings. They knew how to move inside spaces that looked uninhabited. They had also, between 2022 and 2025, accumulated significant financial exposure. Court documents filed after the arrest described failed flip projects, defaulted hard money loans, and one particularly catastrophic renovation deal in Kootenai County that left all three with combined personal debt approaching $1.4 million. The motive was plain in those same court filings. In February 2026, David Volker, Hannah Volker's ex-husband, had received a $4.2 million malpractice settlement, widely reported in local legal trade publications and picked up briefly by regional news outlets. His name appeared in 3 separate publicly accessible legal databases. Anyone looking for a family with sudden, documented wealth would have found him within minutes. This is the part that matters. The kidnappers didn't need inside access to financial records. They needed a browser and a news search. The information that made Hannah Volker a target was sitting online for anyone to find. Delray, Hoff, and Cull had surveilled her for approximately 6 weeks before March 19th. They knew her shift schedule. They knew her parking location. They had identified a window, the transition from a 12-hour overnight to the Lot D walk, where a woman alone, fatigued, in a partially monitored parking structure, was at maximum exposure. The abduction took under 90 seconds. There were no witnesses. The parking structure camera covering the north section of Lot D had been inoperative for 11 days before the abduction. Spokane PD's initial investigation discovered this. There was no footage. Delray, Hoff, and Cull had chosen Lot 27, a model home in a stalled residential development called Clearview Ridge, north of Cheney, for one specific reason. It was legally in limbo. The development's primary contractor had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in January 2026. The property records were in dispute between 3 creditors. No bank owned it yet. No managing party was actively visiting the site. The development had been partially graded, partially framed, and then simply stopped. Several model homes stood complete or near complete, connected to the power grid, but listed as unoccupied by the developer's estate administrator. Delray and Hoff had worked a subcontract on the original development. They knew the property. They knew it was empty. They knew no one was checking it. In the basement of Lot 27, behind the framed-out alcove designated in the building plans as the future furnace housing, they constructed a 9 by 11-foot room. Soundproofed with materials they purchased across 4 separate hardware stores in 2 states. The room had power and ventilation. It was not visible on the original building plans and would not be visible to a cursory inspection of the structure. The kidnappers had planned a 90-day operation. Send one demand. Wait. Apply pressure through controlled contact. Extract the payment in installments. Then disappear. They had never planned for Eric Chambers. I spent time going through the technical details of what Chambers actually found that afternoon, and what kept standing out was this. The anomaly he flagged was genuinely minor by telecommunication standards. It was exactly the kind of thing a technician under a quota might have logged as low priority and moved past. April 15th, 2026. Approximately 2 p.m. Chambers was conducting a routine microcell audit in the Clearview Ridge area, standard maintenance work to assess signal coverage in a newly developed zone. His equipment logged a 4G signal booster operating on a residential frequency in an area that had no registered residential users. The booster was mounted on the chimney of Lot 27, not visible from the road, positioned to pull signal from the nearest Verizon tower and rebroadcast it inside the structure. Signal boosters aren't unusual. Homeowners use them. But Lot 27 was listed as vacant. A signal booster drawing consistent power and running active encrypted data traffic on a vacant property was anomalous. Not alarming. Anomalous. Chambers logged it as suspected signal piracy, a common enough infraction in rural areas where people tap into vacant properties' infrastructure for free connectivity. He filed a maintenance report, flagged the address, and went home. Standard procedure. His job was done. The report moved through Verizon's internal ticketing system and by protocol was flagged to the company's regional compliance contact at the FBI's Seattle Cyber Division. Routine. These flags came in regularly. Most were exactly what they appeared to be: signal piracy, unauthorized booster installations, occasional amateur radio interference. Special Agent Claire Navarro processed the flag on the morning of April 16th. She had 3 open cyber referrals on her desk that morning. She also had on a second monitor the open case board from the Seattle field office's Violent Crimes Liaison, a rotating bulletin of active missing persons cases in the Pacific Northwest that cyber analysts were asked to cross-reference when reviewing communications anomalies. Hannah Volker's case was on that board. The reason it was there came from a decision made 11 days earlier. When the FBI's initial analysis of the Day 3 ransom email had gone cold, an analyst had flagged one residual data point: the burner phone family used to access the anonymizing proxies, not the specific device that had been wiped, but the network signature. A cluster of 3 prepaid devices that had all registered on the same cell tower within the same 40-minute window on March 22nd. The tower was in the Cheney area, 12 miles north of Cheney. Navarro pulled Chambers' report, then she pulled the tower log from March 22nd. The encrypted traffic profile from the signal booster at Lot 27 matched the traffic signature family from that same tower. It was not a direct match. It was a pattern correlation, the same category of encrypted routing, the same frequency hopping behavior, the characteristics consistent with a burner device cluster attempting to anonymize communications through a residential signal booster. Navarro wrote up her analysis in 40 minutes. She sent it up the chain at 9:47 a.m. By noon, it had reached the Spokane resident agency. By 2 p.m., a supervising agent had requested a surveillance flyover of Clearview Ridge. A civilian drone operated by the FBI's Technical Surveillance Unit flew the development at 4:30 p.m. The thermal imaging return from Lot 27 showed one concentrated heat signature in the basement level. The structure was supposed to be empty. That heat signature changed everything. Here's what doesn't make sense on the surface. 27 days had passed. The FBI had access to the Cheney area tower log from day 11 of the investigation. The pattern correlation between the ransom email's burner network and that specific tower had existed in the data for weeks. What was missing was the bridge, a second data point anchoring those devices to a specific structure at a specific address. Eric Chambers provided that bridge by accident on his way back to a service van in a gravel lot, filling out a form he'd filled out hundreds of times before. The surveillance operation that followed the drone imaging lasted approximately 14 hours. Agents confirmed continuous power draw at the address. They confirmed the thermal signature persisted, consistent with a living person in a confined space. They ran the property records and confirmed the bankruptcy status, the absence of any authorized occupant, and the prior contractor connections of Del Rey and Hoff to the original development. At 11 p.m. on April 16th, a federal magistrate signed the search and arrest warrants. The FBI did not wait for daylight. There's a line in the planning documents for the Lot 27 entry that reads almost clinically given what was at stake. Interior configuration unverified, assumed deviation from original building plans. That single line meant the 14-agent team breaching the structure at 4:21 a.m. on April 17th would have no confirmed knowledge of what the basement actually looked like until they were inside it. Del Rey and Hoff had framed a hidden room. The original building plans obtained from the developer's bankruptcy estate the same evening the warrants were issued showed the basement as open plan with a single mechanical room alcove. The thermal imaging suggested the heat source was behind the primary alcove wall. The team's entry plan accounted for this. A 6-agent sub-element was assigned to the basement level, with tools to breach non-load-bearing partition walls on approach. They had a structural engineer's assessment of the building plans, completed in under 3 hours, by a consultant the FBI reached at 11:30 p.m. The assessment confirmed the alcove wall was non-structural. It could be breached. What would you have done in the hours before that breach? Knowing someone was almost certainly behind that wall, not knowing the condition they were in, not knowing whether the men who put her there were still inside? The tactical commander, Supervisory Special Agent Paul Descher, made the call at 3:45 a.m. Proceed without additional delay. Surveillance had not confirmed the presence of Delray, Hoff, or Cull inside the structure, but it had not confirmed their absence either. The risk of further delay, the risk that one of them might be monitoring the area, might become aware of the surveillance, might take action inside, outweighed the risk of an unverified floor plan. 14 agents, 2 breach points, the rear exterior door, and a basement egress window. Flash bang deployment at the rear entry to displace any occupants in the main structure. Simultaneous basement entry through the egress window. This was the obstacle that doesn't show in the public account of the case. The basement egress window was partially blocked by construction debris that hadn't appeared in the drone imaging. The 2-agent entry element assigned to the window lost approximately 90 seconds clearing the obstruction. 90 seconds during which the 6 primary basement agents were already inside and moving toward the alcove. They found the door to the hidden room on the south wall of the alcove, a standard interior door, hinged outward, secured with a padlock. The padlock was cut in under 20 seconds. Hannah Volker was inside, seated on the floor, alive. She had been reported missing on March 20th. By the morning of April 17, she had been in that room for 27 days. Volker was transported by ambulance to Sacred Heart Medical Center, the same hospital where she worked, arriving at approximately 5:15 a.m. She was admitted directly and received immediate medical attention. The attending physician's notes, referenced in court documents, described her condition as consistent with prolonged confinement in a restricted environment. She did not give a formal statement to investigators until April 21st. The FBI waited for her clearance from the attending team before conducting any interviews. The 90-day timeline Delray and Hoff had planned tells you exactly how little weight they gave to what they were doing to another person. They built a room, they stocked it, they calculated how long they could hold her. That clinical calculation, 90 days like a lease term, is the most telling detail in the entire case file. These weren't men acting in desperation. They were operating on a business schedule. Delray, Hoff, and Cole were not at Lot 27 when the FBI entered. This is where the case becomes more complicated. All 3 had left the property on April 16th, the same day Chambers filed his maintenance report, the same day Navarro made the correlation. The timing was not a coincidence that investigators could dismiss. The working theory in the initial days after the rescue was that someone had tipped the 3 men. That possibility, an informational leak somewhere in the chain between Chambers' report and the FBI's mobilization, triggered an internal review that ran parallel to the criminal prosecution. That review found no confirmed leak. What it found instead was a more straightforward explanation. Delray had been monitoring Verizon service activity in the Clearview Ridge area using a commercially available cell network scanner. When Chambers' audit equipment swept the development, the scanner logged the activity. Delray flagged it as a potential compliance visit. The 3 men had an exit protocol. If any service vehicle or unfamiliar equipment registered in the area, they evacuated within 4 hours. They were gone before Chambers had finished writing his report. Delray was apprehended on April 19th, 2 days after the raid, at a budget motel in Spokane Valley. He had not left the area. Hoff was taken into custody the same day, at a storage facility in Airway Heights where he had gone to retrieve documents. Cull was arrested on April 21st in Coeur d'Alene at his own residence, apparently operating under the assumption that if he simply returned home, the absence of physical evidence connecting him directly to the room would provide cover. It didn't. The FBI had construction materials from the room traced to hardware store purchases. Surveillance footage from 2 of those stores showed Cull purchasing soundproofing materials in February 2026, more than 3 weeks before the abduction. His purchase history connected him to the preparation of the room, not just its use. All 3 were indicted on federal kidnapping charges, conspiracy, and a separate count of transmitting a ransom demand using interstate wire communications. The last charge carried an independent mandatory sentence. Did the 90-day plan tell investigators something about how these men viewed the law, or something about how they viewed the person they were holding? That question came up more than once in the prosecution's pretrial filings. Delray entered a guilty plea in early June 2026. His attorney negotiated cooperation on the financial trail, specifically on how the 3 men had intended to receive and move the ransom payment. The cooperation provided the prosecution with documentation of a cryptocurrency laundering structure that had been partially pre-built before the abduction. Hoff and Cull did not cooperate. As of the current date, their cases are moving toward trial. The financial structure Delray described in his cooperation agreement was more developed than investigators had initially assessed. The 3 men had not simply planned to receive a cryptocurrency payment to one wallet. They had established a 5-stage conversion structure, crypto to crypto, converted through 3 intermediate wallets in jurisdictions with limited U.S. regulatory reach, ultimately moving toward cash via a peer-to-peer exchange network. The structure was pre-built and waiting. This suggests one of 2 things. Either the men had done this before, or they had received advice from someone with more sophisticated financial crime experience. The FBI's investigation into the financial structure has not publicly identified additional co-conspirators. That thread remains open. The $4.2 million malpractice settlement that made David Volker a target was never directly at risk. He had received legal guidance after the Day 3 ransom demand and had placed the funds into an escrow arrangement while cooperating with the FBI. The kidnappers never collected a single dollar. On May 14, 2026, the Department of Justice formalized the citizen service citation for Eric Chambers. The citation was presented at a brief ceremony at the FBI's Seattle field office. Chambers, who works out of a Verizon regional service center in the Spokane area, attended with his immediate supervisor and 2 colleagues. He told a reporter from the Spokesman Review, the same day the citation was announced, that he had almost categorized the signal booster flag as low priority, one of dozens of minor anomalies in a routine audit sweep. He said the only reason he wrote it up as a formal report rather than a field note was because the model home structure was on private property with a listed owner of record, which meant any unauthorized equipment required a compliance notification under his company's internal protocols. Protocol, not instinct, not suspicion, protocol. The strangest part of this case, the thing that lingers after you've gone through all of it, is the compression of probability. A bankruptcy filing that left a property ownerless, a developer's records that listed the home as vacant, a service technician following a form correctly, an FBI analyst with 2 monitors and an open bulletin. All of it collapsing into a single correlation on the morning of April 16th. Remove anyone link. The case doesn't close on day 27. Special Agent Navarro has not commented publicly on the case. Chambers received his citation and returned to his service route. The Clearview Ridge development remains in bankruptcy proceedings. Lot 27 has been sealed by order of the court, pending the conclusion of criminal proceedings against Hoff and Cull. The prosecution's timeline in the trial-bound cases is currently scheduled for the 4th quarter of 2026. Several elements of the investigation remain incomplete by any public accounting. The financial structure Delray described in his cooperation agreement, the 5-stage cryptocurrency conversion chain, has not been fully dismantled. The FBI confirmed to the court in sealed filings that the intermediate wallets in the chain were accessed by at least one additional party who has not been identified or charged. That party may have been a passive technical contractor or something more. The investigation continues. The Clearview Ridge development itself presents an unresolved forensic question. Investigators documented that the soundproofed room had been modified twice from its original construction. The ventilation system had been upgraded with materials purchased in January 2026, before the abduction. The timeline of those modifications suggests the three men were planning the operation further in advance than any of the currently filed charging documents indicate. Delray's cooperation agreement addressed the cryptocurrency structure. It did not fully address the timeline of the room's construction. There are weeks of preparation unaccounted for. If you've ever driven past a construction site with the frames half up and the windows covered in plastic, the kind of place that sits at the edge of a suburb and just stops, you understand how invisible these spaces are. Clearview Ridge was one of roughly 200 stalled residential developments in eastern Washington alone, all of them in various stages of legal limbo after the rate adjustment wave of late 2024. Dozens of them with model homes connected to power grids, listed as vacant, visited by no one. The FBI's assessment after the Volker case is that Lot 27 was not uniquely suited to what Delray and his partners did there. It was just the one they used. What that means for similar structures and similar developments is a question the Bureau is not answering publicly. Hannah Volker returned to work at Sacred Heart Medical Center's ICU in late May 2026. That information comes from a single line in a local Spokane news brief. There was no interview, no public statement. 2 trials are pending. One financial thread leads somewhere the prosecution hasn't announced. The room at Lot 27 has been documented, photographed, and sealed, but the knowledge of how to build one and where to find empty structures to build it in was never held by only 3 men. Delray is cooperating. Hoff and Cull are not. The Clearview Ridge development sits unfinished on the scrub plateau north of Cheney, Washington. The model homes are still standing. The unfinished frames beside them still face the sky. Eric Chambers' service route takes him through that area every few months. He still writes up every anomaly he finds. If you want to see what happens when the financial trail from a case like this leads somewhere bigger than 3 contractors, subscribe. This channel covers the cases that don't get resolved in a single press release. Comment below. Does a case like this change how you think about what's in the building you pass every day? Or does that kind of thought just become background noise? The room has been sealed. The demand that created it has a source that hasn't been fully named. And somewhere in the chain of 5 cryptocurrency wallets, one entry belongs to a person the FBI hasn't charged yet. The case record on Lot 27 is 112 pages. Most of it is sealed. Eric Chambers' report was 4 sentences long.